Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to me to come here and talk to you tonight. Thank you very much for you that you're here tonight when there is so much else, I'm sure, happening in Göttingen. I know there is at least one other competing event tonight, and so I'm very pleased to see that nonetheless there are so many people here listening to me. Right. I would like to start by saying that if you look at the history of archaeology, if you look at the early history of archaeology, it's always very closely connected to collections. It's always an uneasy relationship between the two, and it has prompted at least one person to say that collecting and archaeology in the 16th century are more or less like two bastard sisters, because they are related, they are connected, they belong together, but each of them has its own agenda, and therefore it's never an easy start for the two of them. But we can trace how they develop in a very relatively short time to actually prompt one another to increase knowledge about the collections and increase the collections as well. To start with the story of an uneasy start. In the early 1490s, let me see whether I can do this properly, tombs and ancient monuments were discovered in the vicinity of Viterbo, which you see here on the screen. The small city has ancient roots and enjoyed a varied history during Lombard, medieval and Renaissance times. It has also been the seat of the papacy in times of trouble between 1257 and 1281. Given Viterbo's origins and history, the discovery of archaeological material is rather to be expected. Nonetheless, the circumstances of the unearthing in 1493 were dodgy, to say the least. It is not quite clear whether there was more than one episode, but seems that it or they happened under the auspices of a certain friar, Annio da Viterbo. At least one of them also took place in the presence of Pope Alexander VI and may have been orchestrated for his benefit. The excavation might conceivably even have been a ruse thought up by Annio in accordance with Alexander, for we know that they collaborated. Annio was appointed as official papal theologian or master of the Sacred Palace in Rome in due course, and as has been suggested by Ingrid Rowland, some of the decoration in the Borgia apartments in the Vatican may have been directly inspired by the sources and theories published in Annio's very popular Antiquities of 1498. The book was dedicated to the Spanish monarchs, Isabel and Ferdinand, and went through a considerable number of different editions. It is by no means my intention to discuss the authenticity or lack thereof of Annio's Commentaria super opera diversorum auctorum de antiquitatibus loquentium, this is the full title of the Antiquities, commentaries on the works of various authors discussing antiquity. My paper is also not concerned with issues relating to foundation myths per se, because that's what Annio is usually connected to in research. Rather, I would like to discuss collections, in particular collections of antiquities, their perception in mainly 16th century northern to central Italy, and the development of a debate between material culture, historiography, and antiquarian knowledge and methodology. My main research interest is in collections, and I intend to revisit and reevaluate tonight some of my past work in the light of new approaches I am currently trying out on a more recent project. First, I would like us to spend a bit more time with Annio and his achievements, for even though his publications were soon revealed as forgeries, most notably by Antonio Agustin, you see on the screen, Archbishop of Tarragona and a great expert on ancient coins. You can also see there's a Spanish collection through the Archbishop, the Pope, and the two dedicatees, Isabel and Ferdinand. And a great expert on ancient coins, they also continued to attract the attentions of numerous scholars across Europe in the centuries to come. In fact, as you can witness tonight, we still talk about him. Anthony Grafton Ingrid Rowland, Walter Stevens, and quite a few others have investigated the friar's work, which has been called instrumental sometimes in giving Etruscan studies of the old stamp a bad name. Despite spurious claims to be able to read Latin, Greek, a range of Near Eastern languages as well as Etruscan, Annio is also reputed to have been one of the first to make real inroads into Etruscan linguistics and grammar. For the purpose of this paper, it does not matter whether Annio was a gifted forger or not. What is important, though, is his connection with the cultural background of an era during which ancient manuscripts were rediscovered at a regular basis. Tombs were being unearthed and drew an audience of scholars as well as artists who may have sketched the remains. And when the printing press, higher literacy rates and cheaper books and pamphlets bet on dissemination and debate. The chance discovery of a tomb in Castellina in Chianti in 1507, and I show you here the Rocca and the Etruscan Museum in the city at present, made the headlines at the time and was still discussed in some detail by Giambattista Gelli and Pierfrancesco Giambulari, members of the Accademia Fiorentina and authors of works exploring the diverse foundation myths of Florence in the 1540s. Annio's discovery in Viterbo, however, made it into Vasari's lives and thus gained international notoriety as well as an explanation of the antiquarian methodology of the times. According to Vasari, or perhaps I should say according to his advisors and collaborators, the statues talked about in this little excerpt I put on the screen, these statues proved that Etruscan art had reached great sophistication early on. In this passage, the style of the sculptures is compared to archaeological evidence, such as a type of construction of the tomb in which they were found. The fact that all inscriptions were in the Etruscan language was also noted. The conclusion reached, therefore, was that these works of art had to be perforce of great age. You can see it says antiquissime. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. That is a keyword because everything Etruscan has to be very, very old, almost as old as Egyptian art. However contested Annio's findings may have been by the middle of the 16th century, in the early 1490s, Viterbo's town hall, which is now the Museo Civico, witnessed a display of these statues, of reliefs and inscriptions. So this is quite astonishing, not only that what has been revealed quite early on as a forgery is displayed somewhere, but that it actually is in a sort of early public museum in the town hall, in fact, of the city. In fact, some of them are still there and can be admired on the website of the Museo Civico. I show you here 3 examples. They are labeled as I falsi di Annio, the fakes of Annio. Here is number 2, and here is number 3. I show you 3 examples which, according to what I read about them, and I have not seen them in the flesh, I only see them on the website, so have seen them on the website so far, had once been presented as proof of the great age of Viterbo, whose Etruscan name was supposedly Vetulonia. The Egyptian or Libyan Hercules, founding father of many a Tuscan city, had once ruled as king of Vetulonia, and Isis and Osiris had paid a visit to the city, which had been recorded in a hieroglyphic, possibly the one that you see on the screen, and you can see there is an inscription which actually refers to exactly that event. I cannot tell how detailed the general knowledge on ancient Egyptian artifacts was in 15th century Italy. Therefore, it is hard to say how people may have reacted to the suggestion that 2 fragments from medieval and later times patched together and presented with great sang-froid made a convincing Egyptian antiquity. Interestingly, though, Annio's findings were displayed. Their message chimed with Leon Battista Alberti's assertion that Egyptian and Etruscan cultures were among the oldest in the world. Age and provenance are data by which we set great store in private collections as well as in public museums. It is important to know where an object comes from, how it became part of the collection, to establish where to establish a trail of ownership that will attest to the object's bona fide status and provide the necessary context for its study and understanding. Dating an object is equally necessary for this knowledge because it will help finding the collectible's rightful place within the chronological and artistic framework created by other pieces in the collection. A particular example of collecting and display, which I spent some time studying, is the Scrittoio of Calliope at the Florentine Palazzo Vecchio. A small study room of the kind that many a well-to-do person appointed in his or her palazzo from around the 14th century onwards, although there are ancient precedents as well. This room type developed with time into some sort of mini museum tucked away in a safe upper floor corner of the building. Originally a place in which to study or write, sometimes not unlike a little office space with ledgers, a desk and cupboards, these scrittoi or studioli became very fashionable in the 15th century, particularly in Italy. The Medici owned several exemplars in their old family seat on Via Larga, now it's Via Cavour, and after 1540, additional splendidly appointed ones in the Palazzo Vecchio and at the Uffizi building. The Scrittoio of Calliope, there you see what it looks like now, not so splendid, is particularly interesting for it is ostensibly a private chamber set into the apartment of the elements on the second floor. And I've reached the stage where I can either read my script or I can see you, so I have to go a little bit closer to this. Right. Where am I? Terribly sorry, but I think I may have put the wrong plan on this, which doesn't surprise me because I was doing it on a very small screen. So anyway, the apartments go around the oldest part of the palace, and then on the second floor there is a small scrittoio, a small study room, which is basically part of a public apartment, and therefore this idea of great privacy is more like a fiction than actually the truth. However, where am I? Okay. So the apartment of the elements, which functioned as staterooms and guest quarters after Duke Cosimo de' Medici, had moved to the former seat of government to the Florentine Republic. Set up and completed by June 1559, the small study had shelves set against the walls, and I'm sorry, this is a very grainy picture, but at least it's the right one. A fitted system of cupboard drawers housed a particular choice from the main collections of the ducal wardrobe. The red velvet on the walls, the ceiling painting of the Muse Calliope, in the company of the symbols of her sisters, as well as the stained glass window bearing the depiction of the three graces adorning Venus, created the intimate yet regal and pleasantly intellectual backdrop for collectibles shown in close propinquity. The choice of objects happened on the basis of their antiquity and superior Tuscan workmanship, which was set off in some exotic cases by the remoteness of their provenance from the Near East or the New Worlds of the Indias. The combined features of small size and great value were the result of materials, rarity, age, and geography. The attraction may not always have been immediate. Perhaps it was more of an acquired taste. But the choreography of and presentation in such a place needed to be explained carefully to those lucky enough to visit, and even more so to the many who were not invited to step over this inner sanctum's threshold. While amazement and wonder were the aims of both collectibles and display, the careful selection as well as the painstaking work with the objects led to a much more direct exposure to the art and artisanship of long ago cultures, as well as faraway parts of the world. This occupation was going to take some time to bear fruit. We know, though, that Vasari described the scrittoio and its contents in the Lives and Ragionamenti. In particular, a famous passage in the Ragionamenti, actually a dialogue between Vasari and Crown Prince Francesco, gave the study its due and places it firmly within the context of the palace's staterooms. Equally, the place of Tuscany from antiquity to Cosimo's own time and its position as part of a first age of globalization was discussed by Vasari and illustrated by the globe at the Muse's feet. Francesco and Vasari talk about the display consisting of a shelf for ancient Aretine bronzes running along the walls of the scrittoio that is supported by pilasters and crowned by columns. Drawers and cupboards dedicated to various types of collectibles such as coins, gems, crystals, and larger antiquities were fitted between the pilasters. The hood that gives headroom to the spiral staircase leading to the first floor is rather deep, and therefore it is not clear whether it would have been covered by shelving. Paintings by Giulio Clovio, Bronzino, and other miniaturists were hung on the walls. It is interesting to note that Vasari's description seems to indicate that he alone had chosen and arranged the objects for the scrittoio. No doubt, as an Aretine, he was very proud of the provenance of the bronzetti. Bringing the most beautiful and precious small objects to the scrittoio di Calliope must certainly have constituted a crucial moment in the history of the collection. Inventory lists enumerating what was chosen for the scrittoio state that 71 pieces were taken there on the 13th of June 1559. Subsequently, it must have been decided that a few more objects would fit into the scrittoio, and we've got lists of addenda. Some of the objects on the second list were even repeated on the third, so it's sometimes a little bit difficult to establish how many pieces were really in there at what time. The majority of the items in these documents were antiquities in bronze and all'antica pieces of the same material. Ancient marble fragments were also displayed. On this occasion, not only important choices were made regarding the pieces to be displayed in the scrittoio di Calliope, most likely Vasari and his friends and advisors had been reviewing the collection as a whole. Planning the most advantageous form of exhibition may also have made them think about categories of objects and about the development of different periods and regional styles, and about how to distinguish between them. Whenever Vasari discusses the display of works of art in special display rooms, one of the key words he uses is ordine, order, another one maniera, manner, and yet another one bello or bellissimo. Although it is hard to translate these precisely into modern art historical terms in English or Italian, Vasari's use of order seems to hint at categorization and a scholarly historical framework. His use of manner points at a particular style and quality of workmanship, such as the maniera etrusca, while beauty in his definition seems to be the net result of the former too. Although the scrittoio was always intended for the display of antiquities, it also became the showcase for small bronzes and miniatures of 16th century workmanship and hosted exotica, which for the greater part had probably arrived as diplomatic gifts. We know that Cosimo asked his agents to search for books and ancient coins in Constantinople. Both he and his wife Eleonora provided Jacopo Caponi with necessary funds for objects from Egypt. Eleonora asked specifically for qualcosa per donne, something for women, and that Cosimo's son and successor was going to import exotic objects from Goa by the shipload. The botanical gardens Cosimo commissioned at Florence and Pisa, among the earliest in Europe, also benefited from the influx of foreign plants, probably one of the nicer results of the age of exploration. Not to forget that this occupation with rare and prestigious objects happened now in an intellectual climate which had been changing gradually but radically since the late 13th century to favor the close study of ancient art and material culture, rediscovery of ancient knowledge through the texts of ancient writers, as well as the comparison and discussion of diverse cultures whose artifacts had been brought to the attention of scholars and artists across the divides of time and space. To compare the appeal of antiquities and exotica as rarities collected in early modern Europe is not a novel idea. Their respective geographical and chronological remoteness as a source of attraction may be obvious, but nonetheless needs to be explored in the context of real collections. Documented in writing, for example in the form of inventories and paper museums, the paradigm of hard to get can thus become part of a theoretical framework created in early modern treatises, which in due course set collectors on new paths in their activities. The age of exploration not only resulted in the discovery of the Americas and other geographical areas not yet on the radar of Europeans, but in the long run to the foundation of colonies, the triangular trade, and thus to an exchange of people, resources, and information between the continents, as well as a scientific occupation with anthropological, ethnological, art historical, and botanical themes and specimens now available to research. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 was one of particular importance for changes to scholarship, since this event had prompted the famous Council of Basle, Ferrara, and Florence in the 1430s. The final phase took place in Florence, where to the council had been transferred in 1439 under the auspices of Cosimo the Elder Medici and Pope Eugenius IV. This event was going to be crucial for that city's imminent history and Europe's intellectual future in unexpected ways, for it brought Greek scholars and books into the city and raised the awareness for non-Latin antiquity and knowledge. The teaching of ancient Greek had almost ceased in Western Europe by this time. The influx of highly qualified intellectuals and their libraries, Bessarion's collection of manuscripts was going to be donated to the Senate of Venice and forms an important part of the Bibliotheca Marciana, means that an essential, vast, and up to this point unavailable portion of ancient heritage could only be once more unlocked and processed. As a result, works and styles of art, linguistics, historiography, medicine, the life sciences, and geography, to mention just a few, received inspiration of a sort that can hardly be overestimated. And thus it created knowledge which now became more widespread, thanks to better and more widespread education, newly founded printing presses, and a greater willingness to invest the time and money necessary for the acquisition and reading of books. I have called the Scrittoio of Calliope a Tuscan museum in my previous work, and I still think that the emphasis on Etruscan and Tuscan artifacts was crucial for the setup of the room and the selection of the objects. It was also crucial for its closure in due course. It is important to look at the date when the room was first completed, for by the summer of 1559, Cosimo's political fortunes and his cultural politics were about to change dramatically. On the one hand, his relationship to Rome and the papacy was going to improve considerably, with the election of Giovanni Angelo Medici as Pius IV on Christmas Day 1559. The new pontiff was going to appoint Cosimo's son Giovanni and later another son Ferdinando as cardinals and helped smooth Cosimo's access to the coveted antiquities of Rome. On the other hand, the abdication of Charles V in 1556 and the election of his brother Ferdinand rather than his son Philip as emperor in 1558 had mixed the political cards afresh. Therefore, Cosimo may have seen a wealth of opportunities which had been barred to him for a long time. If he wanted to increase his power and improve his standing among European peers, though, it was probably better not to continue with trends in cultural politics which had presented the Etruscan ancestors as enemies of Rome and thus as a people who had had the bad fortune of being an earlier as well as a superior civilization in many respects. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Cosimo therefore was well advised if he toned down his attempts of establishing his own brand of regional history and aligned Tuscan antiquity with the patterns observed by the other powers in Europe. From now on, he generally preferred a Roman past for Florentia and a foundation in early imperial times, such as under the Emperor Augustus, who became regarded as an alter ego of the dukes. Roman antiquities started to arrive in Florence to be displayed in a newly set up antiquarium at the Palazzo Pitti across the Arno and in the Boboli Gardens behind the building. Some of the most famous statues, For example, the Laocoon or the Apollon Belvedere, which you see now on the screen, could, however, not be acquired by the Florentine Duke, because they were in the Belvedere, for example, and he therefore had to make do with copies in bronze or marble and in diverse sizes. As you can see at the exhibition, Abgekupfert, which takes place at the moment, numerous copies of these famous antiquities existed in Rome, in Florence, and soon at many an English country house. Reductions were popular at 16th century courts, even though they were copies, for they were often copies made in more costly materials than the supposed original. For what artists and antiquarian experts were only about to start to understand was the fact the Roman sculptures were in most cases copies of Greek originals, which had been executed in bronze. Therefore, the 16th century Renaissance bronze from Florence was almost closer to the Greek prototype across the temporal as well as the geographical divide than to any of the intervening copies in marble created for Roman patrons. The Etruscans were by no means gone from Florentine historiography or Florentine politics. They had to be interpreted in a different light, though. No longer the defeated enemies, but the gifted teachers of Rome. Their cultural achievements and some of their key works of art, for example, the Chimera of Arezzo, discovered in November 1553 and displayed in the cellar of Leo X in Palazzo Vecchio as a fingerpost towards the Etruscan display in the Scrittoio of Calliope, still attracted the interest of artists and antiquarians. We have the document in which the circumstances of the Chimera's discovery were recorded, in which not only describes some of the other bronzes discovered nearby, but also the fact that the lion had lost its serpent tail. The inscription was duly noted, and even though nobody could make sense of it at the time, it was copied into the document. I think I can find that one, because I see it here. I've just written this in here. So it was copied down, even though they weren't entirely sure what it was supposed to mean. What is interesting as well is that even at the time, doubts were expressed whether this was really the Chimera of Arezzo, the Chimera of Bellerophon. And so soon they were trying to figure out what it actually represented. And apparently they also went to have a look if they could find the serpent tail somewhere in the rubbish nearby, but they couldn't. Vasari in the Risorgimenti was going to discuss, I think I've got that here, the bronze in some detail, and also picked up on the question of the subject matter. He hinted that advice had been sought among the learned at Rome, and that ancient coins bearing the image of a chimera had been requested in order to confirm the expert opinion with ancient written sources as well as with examples of the surviving material culture of ancient Rome. Vasari, most likely using the information provided by some of the leading antiquarians of his time, for example Piero Ligorio, also discussed the peculiar workmanship of the bronze and attempted a definition of the maniera etrusca or Etruscan style that might subsequently be used to distinguish Etruscan art from Greek or Roman art. In a way, less than a century after Annio's discoveries and publications, we encounter something like a proto-scientific debate about the origins, the great age, the development, and the particular style of Etruscan art, which will be continued over the course of the coming centuries. The Chimera of Arezzo, which prompted much of the debate, was going to be regarded as a symbol of the Tuscan Grand Duchy under Medici rule, but also as a work of art akin to the she-wolf of Rome, the Lupa, and the lion of San Marco in the Piazzetta of San Marco. Metallurgic investigations in all three of these great bronzes have at least raised doubts regarding the age and provenance of the wolf and the lion. And therefore it may well be the case that Vasari and friends had it right when they claimed that the Chimera was amazingly old as well as an amazing piece of Etruscan artistry. I was discussing this afternoon the possible age of the Lupa. Of course, this is a copy standing outside in Rome. This is not the one in the Capitoline Museum. But apparently at the moment the idea is that it is a 13th century copy after a lost Roman original. But if you go to the Capitoline Museum and look at it very close up, you may have some doubts if you compare it to some of the Arnolfo di Cambio bronzes. Of course, you must see them in close detail as well, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. What I have been trying to discuss here so far is the important dichotomy between written sources, documentation, scholarly framework on the one side, and the material culture on the other for the institution and development of a scientific culture and the acquisition of knowledge starting in the 15th and 16th century. And I'm of course fully aware that these are first attempts and that it is very easy to smile at some of these attempts, but I think they deserve to be taken seriously. What makes and breaks a collection then? That is a question some of us here tonight will have been asking ourselves many a time. Are there particular objects that lend themselves to becoming collectibles? In my view, there are 5 main factors which turn a mass of objects into a collection, namely the rarity based on age and provenance, display and categorization necessary to create order and beauty, scholarly processing and dissemination, encyclopedic completeness, and last but by no means least, an audience. Your ideas on the matter may be different, and I would like to hear your views, and for that reason, among others, I founded the International Forum Collecting and Display, which Marie-Louise has mentioned earlier, and I'm sorry, this looked perfectly clear on my computer screen, but it's a little bit hazy right now, but if you go online, you can find it there. 5 international conferences and 4 volumes of proceedings later, we think more than ever that a collection needs an intellectual framework. We also have encountered so many different approaches to theoretical underpinning that it has been amazing to see how fruitful the dialogue between the collectibles and knowledge in the broadest possible sense became over the centuries. I want to conclude by presenting 3 examples of collectibles and the modes of their acquisition and reasons for their attraction across time and space. During the early modern period, most people had few occasions to meet foreign people, animals, or objects. Exceptions were offered by foreign embassies and diplomatic gifts. Famously, Lorenzo de' Medici was sent a giraffe and Leo X a rhinoceros. Another important exception was offered by war. Prisoners and loot provided insights into foreign cultures and customs that became even more important in the case of a victory over such a foreign power. Booty could be used in diverse modes. It could be studied and imitated. It could be melted down and turned into celebratory sculpture on fountains and monuments. It could be, and it was, displayed in many an armory across Europe, sometimes next to allegedly ancient weapons, as happened in the mostly forgotten and unfortunately destroyed armory of the Uffizi. The Turkish threat to Europe was going to continue for a while, and thus the exposure to war and the possibility to gain such booty. Meanwhile, Europe had discovered the new worlds and posed no less danger to the indigenous people and cultures of the Americas. Gold arrived in large quantities in Europe, but so did unknown plants and animals, which are now our staple diet. Alarming works of art, as well as alarming reports about the religious customs of the Aztecs and other cultures of Middle and Southern America, were brought back by conquistadores, missionaries, and scholars. Pieces such as this one were displayed in special display cases next to antiquities, medieval and 16th century works of art, weapons of Damascene workmanship, as well as imitations thereof. Whilst at first horrified wonder may have dominated initial encounters with heathen art and heathen religions, it soon prompted artistic and scholarly interest in the other culture, much as it had done in regards with classical antiquity, and therefore influenced the modes of display of material collections as well as of the collections of knowledge. And finally, looking east, Europeans were becoming ever more acquainted with Far Eastern cultures and artifacts. The British and the Dutch East India companies, as well as members of the Jesuit order, acted as mediators by the exchange of goods, people, and knowledge. While at first a roaring trade in exotica made especially for export to Europe to be sold to largely ignorant collectors profited from a growing market, Soon the increasing sophistication of the Europeans meant that they were able to distinguish between cheaply made trinkets and rarities, which were actually worth the effort and cost of acquisition. In this case as well, amazement and wonder at the foreign character of the pieces imported were going to prompt a more scholarly curiosity that was going to have its effect on collecting and display practices. At the same time, we also know that a similar process took place in China and Japan, where in parallel to Chinese rooms in Europe with depictions of tea parties and display cases for porcelain, local rulers imported European art and had it set up in exhibitions that tried to recreate the original architectural context of their former homes. While such displays of objects could in theory be understood and enjoyed to some extent even when verbal communication failed, foreign knowledge could only be unlocked and appropriated by advanced familiarity of each other's language. Dictionaries as well as grammars were important stepping stones towards a display gradually changing from one of wonder to one of knowledge. Therefore, I would like to mention a Hungarian scholar who came to Göttingen in the early 19th century to study Oriental languages. Eventually, Csoma Sándor set out for the Indian subcontinent on a search for the Hungarian country of origins, which he didn't find. An adventurous journey brought him to Tibet, where he was going to work on a Tibetan dictionary and grammar. He is regarded as the founder of Tibetology. Csoma died in Darjeeling, where his memorial stands to this day, and I found today that there is also a plaque on one of the houses of Blume 2000 on Wendelstraße, in case you want to have a look. I think I've been wittering on for long enough, and therefore I would like to conclude with the cover of the 4th volume of Proceedings, Collecting East and West. East and West, as well as North and South, are of course always relative to the place of the collector and to his or her own cultural origins. It is nonetheless worthwhile to investigate the object's relationship to and place within the collection and trace how and when their specific distance of time and place called forth the wish for more detailed information about their geographical and chronological origins. Thank you very much.